Hey everybody, this is the Freethinking Femmes Podcast of Houston, Texas. My name is Raina Dunham, co-host and co-founder of Freethinking Femmes. I'm a Houston, Texas resident for nearly a decade and Metro native. I am joined by one of our other diverse voices. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hey everyone, I'm Deanna Adams. I serve on the board of Houston Black Non-Believers, which is a local organization created to support African American freethinkers in Houston. And I also have a blog, Musings on a Limb, where I express my views as an African American atheist professional mom on subjects related to the intersectionality of racism and skepticism.
All right, so today's topic is going to be focusing on how Texas needs better health care. The purpose of our podcast is to provide a venue for the secular community to discuss very real, current, and important issues. We're here to lift up the voiceless, secular women, LGBTQ, people of color. We're here to say you're not alone. We recognize the struggle and we fight it with you and for you. And to get started today, as usual, some current events. The Bree Newsom Confederate flag story. On June 28th, 2015, a 30-year-old Black Lives Matter activist climbed the flagpole at South Carolina State House and took down the Confederate flag. She was arrested, and the flag was returned, and she was charged with defacing a monument, but later she was released on a $3,000 bond. She stated that it was fueled by the intolerance of the injustice that she sees, and she decided that she would not be ruled by fear. So basically, sounds like she just decided she had had enough of it in the light of the shootings and all the craziness that's been going on. She said, that's enough, I'm done. Time for this flag to come down.
Right, and there's so many different angles to this particular story because obviously this is a huge symbolic gesture. You know, she went up the flagpole and she took it down herself. She said enough was enough. You know, they were discussing in the South Carolina House or what have you, in their government, they were discussing whether or not to take it down. There had to be voting and all of this other pomp and circumstance. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to wait. I'm just going to go up there and I'm going to do it myself. And she was prepared. You know, if you look at the video, she said, you know, I'm prepared to be arrested. I'll be down in just a moment. You know, so she obviously put a lot of thought into it. You know, like I said, it's a big symbolic gesture, definitely. I think it's needed. You know, it was needed to see somebody actually doing something because a lot of the times we talk about people just talking, you know, and I always feel like I'm not doing enough because I'm talking and writing, but, you know, I'm not climbing flagpoles or anything. So it does definitely serve a purpose, and I just hope that continues, that idea of not just talking about it, but doing something continues. Because before this, and even now, I'm not very concerned about the Confederate flag. I'm really not. It's a symbol, just like a lot of different things are. I'm really concerned about the killings and the unfair treatment and the power structure and, you know, the systemic oppression that's going on way more than symbols. You know, sometimes I look at it as, well, at least if I know somebody has a symbol up, I know who to avoid. But as long as we continue on that path of real change, you know, changing the laws, changing the police and their behavior and what have you towards minorities and towards people of color, then I think it's definitely a great thing.
Yeah, it's definitely brave. I know that the consequences of doing such things are usually enough for most people not to do that. The whole, you know, being arrested and possibly losing your job and stuff like that is usually cause for not enough action because there's a lot of struggling today. I mean, in many cases, it's almost to the Great Depression levels in some cases because it's pretty bad out there in a lot of areas. So yeah, I don't know that I would be brave enough to do that, to be completely honest. But it looks like she was saying, quote, I did it for all the fierce black women on the front lines of the movement, for all the little black girls who are watching us. I did it because I'm free. It's a pretty good quote, and I believe I saw that she did an interview on Democracy Now!, which is a pretty good show, and thinking about including a link to that in the description so that people can watch that if they want, because that show usually interviews all kinds of people like this to get their stories out. That's kind of part of the focus of the show. If you're not familiar with, you know, indie, they might consider it leftist almost media shows, but it's part of shows that are run off of basically donations of people and public funding. So it's not NPR, but it is similar to how NPR does things, but in a way it's a little bit better. So I'll find that link and I'll definitely post that in the description. For myself, I can only say that the Confederate flag is very representative of the white pride mentality that my family and I grew up with. So seeing it come down was a huge deal for me because it's time to just give it up. I mean, it's not a history of the lost cause. It's a history of a war that was lost, that tried to tear our country apart so that half of the country could continue to own people. And that's just not okay to celebrate that. I mean, for crying out loud, Robert E. Lee was smart enough to be like, okay, well, we're lucky enough to get amnesty even though we committed treason and went to war against the country. I'm just going to go home and just do my thing.
Right. I definitely agreed. I mean, it's like I said, it's a huge symbolic victory. Well, I can't really say victory because they put it right back up. And even a lot of the symbolism that was around who was tapped to put it back up, I've seen some commentary on the fact that, you know, a black woman went up and took the flag down, and they had 2 black male workers put it back up, you know, and how that symbolically played out. I was encouraged, though, because there was, I don't think it was a GoFundMe, but it was like an Indiegogo or Fundly, one of those links for her as soon as she was arrested that, you know, needed $20,000 for bail, legal expenses, and things like that. And I think it was up to like $35,000 in a few hours. So there's definitely an outpouring of support. And people definitely, I've seen her in cartoons now and, you know, drawings and things like that. So we definitely needed that symbolism. And I remember one of my friends, his little girl asked him, you know, Daddy, can you teach me to climb a flagpole?
Oh.
You know, and he posted that on Facebook, and I said, oh, that's awesome. You know, we need that. We need those heroes and the people that do those things that kind of get people to come together and get people to understand how symbolic this is. So I definitely don't want to take anything away from that at all. I just want to make sure that continues and make sure that laws get changed. People are not disenfranchised anymore. People aren't headed from the school to prison pipeline and prison as soon as they graduate from school to have records and things like that, and police brutality, and so I want all of those things to be dealt with. I'm kind of walking a fine line because I don't want to take anything away from it. But on the other side of it, in the back of my head, it's like, don't get so caught up in the flag, you know, because it's the old switcheroo, you know. Okay, we'll take the flag down, but we're not going to do anything about systemic racism. You can have your symbolic victory, and we're going to keep on doing the status quo. And that's what I don't want to happen.
Right. We'll be able to discuss more of that in a little bit because it's actually part of some other updates that we have. Real quickly, though, I did want to say that it looks like we just passed the 2-year anniversary of the Wendy Davis filibuster on the anti-abortion law that she fought. I believe it was it 13 hours?
Was it 13 or 16 hours?
Yeah, standing in her famous pink shoes, even though it was still passed in a later emergency session. And even though she lost, you know, her campaign for governor, that was kind of what catapulted her to the state level eventually to run. And we had mentioned the organization last episode that, you know, she's going to start based in Texas. That's going to focus on productive, / reproductive rights. I don't know how we're saying that now. I'm seeing it listed as productive more often, so I don't know which one to call it. So I'm going to call it both for now.
Well, she said that productive rights include reproductive rights, so she's calling it productive rights, which encompasses everything.
Gotcha. There you go. So yeah, 2 years since the filibuster. It seems like longer than that, actually. I guess to me, time kind of flies. It seems like almost a world ago. It doesn't seem like it's not even a year ago since the election because Abbott has been so busy doing stupid stuff for the state. But, I mean, we definitely, I think her supporters definitely miss her. Good to see her coming back. In that same vein, didn't SCOTUS have a stay on that law?
Yes, actually, the Supreme Court ruled this week or in the last 2 weeks, that they would, like you said, they ruled a stay on it, so the last few abortion clinics wouldn't close. So I think we went from 41 to like 13 or something in the teens. I need to know these numbers a little bit better, but it was going to go down to 7. 4 basically. No, 7. I think 2 in Houston, 2 in Dallas, and a couple somewhere else. And so they stopped that for the time being while they take up the case. So that's definitely helpful. A lot of the damage has already been done.
Yeah.
And because we went from 40-something down to, low double digits, but at least it stopped it for now. It's kind of like a stopgap measure while they take it up and look at the constitutionality of what Texas did.
Right. That's just, it's good, and it's also kind of scary at the same time, because that's such a crucial, the clinics that do this actually do more than abortions, for starters.
Mm-hmm.
And I know most people expect us to talk about Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is not the only abortion provider, and they're not the only family planning people that we have, and they're not the only ones that we should have. They're just the most popular name that gets thrown around because they have branches and stuff, so they're large enough to have a finger pointed or something.
Right.
But, there are plenty of other clinics that provide this as part of family planning service. So it's a pretty crucial part of women's health, because reproduction is like a major part of the plumbing, basically, and such a reality when it comes to, adulthood and the chances of getting pregnant once you reach a certain age, and, those types of things. It's really frustrating.
Right. It's healthcare. It's basically healthcare. So
right.
Basically, the legislature, and fueled by the Republicans' desire to control women's bodies, are not only stopping abortions, but they're stopping health care. They're stopping women from being able to be seen for things like, endometriosis, or because that's what birth control is used to help as well a lot of the times.
Yeah, also cystic fibrosis and a lot of other conditions that actually use birth control to allow women to function on a day-to-day basis and not let their periods rule their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And also some of those conditions lead to fertility issues as well, where getting pregnant could actually be very dangerous, if I'm not mistaken. So that's also something that women face. Not everyone can or should carry to term, and so termination would be a good option for them because of their health in the beginning. Those clinics are very crucial, and especially in the Valley. If anyone's listening and not familiar with Texas, the Valley is basically the south part of Texas close to Mexico, especially in the very far south tip. That's what we usually refer to as the Valley. They definitely need all kinds of clinics down there, and that'll lead into some of what we're about to talk about with the healthcare step as well.
Before we move on to the next point, just to clarify a couple things that we were talking about earlier, because I'm kind of a stickler for the fact that I felt like, oh, wait, I didn't write this down. The Wendy Davis filibuster, it was supposed to be 13 hours. She needed to speak for 13 hours. She ended up speaking for 11 out of those 13 hours, and then, had to stop. And as far as the Supreme Court ruling on the stay for the abortion clinics, there were, as I mentioned, 41 licensed facilities providing abortions in Texas, and currently there are 19. And that number would drop to 9 if the ruling by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is not put on hold. So that was put on hold, so right now we stand at 19 clinics.
For the entire state.
Right, for the entire state of Texas.
Yeah. And so that's mainly the cities, too?
Yes, because the thing is, the original legislation meant that the doctors had to be licensed to or affiliated with hospital, and the facilities had to be ambulatory care centers. So any doctor that was performing them, way out where they weren't within, I think it was 30 miles, but basically if they weren't within a certain mileage of a hospital and they weren't considered an ambulatory care center, they had to close, which is why so many closed, because you don't need all that to provide abortions. They're pretty cut and dry, pardon the language, but it was basically the hurdles put in place that they knew a lot of these clinics wouldn't be able to satisfy.
That would be just like saying, okay, unless you meet certain requirements at the gun show to get a gun, you can't get a gun. And therefore they would lose lots of sales.
If we did that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, guns are more important than uteruses, I guess, unless you're growing a baby. All right. Well, that kind of leads into some important almost wins in a way in regards to birth control. And the Wheaton College v. Burwell handed down on Wednesday joins a pantheon of Court of Appeals decisions upholding the Obama administration's current birth control policies. Though Hobby Lobby permitted many private employers to refuse to include contraceptive coverage in their employees' health plans if those employers object to birth control on religious grounds, it has also included language suggesting that the government could ensure that these workers obtain contraceptive coverage through an alternative means. And then it goes on to talk about the basic structure. The religious objector must notify the government that it wishes to be exempt from the legal requirement to cover birth control, and it must tell the government which company administers its health plans. And then the government works with the insurance company to provide the contraceptive coverage. So technically the employees aren't paying for it. They're going through the insurance company. So this is like a second lawsuit that went to SCOTUS about birth control coverage through an employer.
Right, it's basically control still. I've been trying to, ever since we decided to talk about healthcare, I've been trying to find a decent analogy for this, but I can't. I mean, it's literally, they're saying, we don't want to pay for it. That was the original problem. We don't want to pay for, birth control because of our deeply held religious beliefs. So they got a stopgap, basically. Not even a stopgap. They got okay, you don't have to pay for birth control. We'll go directly through your insurance company and we'll find out a way, to get these patients covered. Uh-huh. And the companies are still complaining. They're saying, but no, we don't want to be involved at all because if they work for us, and they have our insurance coverage, and even if we don't pay for it, we're still indirectly involved with them getting birth control, which is total BS. I mean, it's total BS. It's, like I said, I've been trying to figure out an analogy, but it's like if me being on this podcast with you is in some way, shape, or form me saying you can go get a gun from the gun show. I mean, I don't know. It makes no sense.
Right, yeah, and there's a quote here from one of the articles about this, and obviously, as usual, we'll include that in the description. It says, though some employers have argued that requiring them to notify the government of which company administers their health plan is a violation of their religious liberty, because this notification sets in motion a chain of events that may lead to a woman using contraception. Courts have largely agreed that religious liberty law does not permit a religious objector to prohibit a private company in the federal government from acting on their own to provide people with birth control coverage. And the person says it is the law, not any action on the part of the college, that obligates insurers to cover Wheaton's employees and students. And there's a very high likelihood they'll appeal it back to SCOTUS once again, so it's not quite at SCOTUS right now. So that's a correction on my part. This is the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit for Wheaton College, which, weren't they in the Hobby Lobby group?
I think so, but I mean, don't quote me on it.
Yeah.
Someone will.
Because, that name sounds familiar, and I should be more familiar with that than I am, but I'm one of the lucky ones that works for the state. So I'm getting pretty good state insurance anyway. So, I mean, they're already complying with marriage equality, actually. So, yeah, that's pretty awesome. So they tend to, once something becomes law, they tend to do exactly what they need to do immediately to be compliant. So that's always nice.
Which is actually really funny because if a lot of people look at Texas, and this is totally an aside, but a lot of people from around the country look at us and say, oh my gosh, Texas is crazy. But the people really aren't that psychotic. It's a combination of the Tom DeLay redistricting and gerrymandering and, getting all the Republican cronies in office that, are doing these crazy, crazy things at the top and, at the highest levels. But the majority of people here we're not just psychotic. And it's funny when you say, you work for the state, and the state usually takes care of its people because it does. I mean, I've worked for the state before too, and I don't now, and I don't, ever want to again. I don't have to, but as far as insurance is concerned and, following the laws and things like that, I never had a problem with those things. It's always like it's weird. It's like if you live here and work here, a lot of times you'll see something totally different than that's being portrayed, by these high-level people saying the weirdest things. But at the same time, they're still fighting so that we can't, have these protections and so they can roll back a lot of these protections.
Right.
But anyway, sorry, that wasn't a side.
No, it's still very much relevant because there were a lot of SCOTUS rulings in the last week and a half that were completely on this line of thought. One of them is kind of a big deal. It's somewhat related to, the Confederate flag thing. And it really surprised me, to be honest, because, we are talking about Texas, and there are many ways in which Texas has some liberal tendencies. I know, gasp, everyone. Oh, no. But then there are also many ways when it's very much pandering to the extreme religious right. And so finding out that Texas was one of the only states that said, no, we're not going to do Confederate flags on personalized license plates issued by the state was surprising to me. I see Confederate flags in a lot of places within the state. So knowing how, Governor Goodhair said, no, we're not going to do that. So he does have a random thought once in a while that is good for the public once in a while.
He's a study, and he's just an interesting study to me, period, because he started off as a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I remember that. I remember when he signed up for requiring the HPV vaccination, which was totally opposite of anyone else in the Republican Party. So he's just a study in contradictions to me personally.
Yeah, definitely.
And I never know which side is the real side, and which side just wants the political power.
Right.
It has to be something.
Right. So apparently the Sons of the Confederates Sons of the Confederates or something like that. I don't remember the exact name. It's in the article, so I'm sorry for mangling the name. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. The decision of Texas to do that caused the Sons of the Confederate to sue, basically. This went all the way to SCOTUS, which is a long way.
Sons of Confederate Veterans, Inc., by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Google is our friend.
Yes, and the ruling held that Texas did not violate the First Amendment in doing this, because the argument they were trying to make was that it violated their First Amendment free speech, basically. And so SCOTUS was like, well, no, these are license plates being issued by the state, so that's a kind of free speech for the state. And, we're not going to go down that road. Pretty much the words of Rick Perry himself, and SCOTUS agreed. So that was a very interesting read, I have to say. Kind of came out of nowhere. It didn't get, any press.
Right. The holding basically was because Texas's specialty license plate designs constitute government speech. It was entitled to reject a proposal for plates featuring a Confederate battle flag.
Right. Considering, once again, that is the flag of a treasonous attempt at a separate foreign government, I kind of have to agree with that. It's very blatantly the battle flag of people that tried to break up the country and went to war with our country. I know we've already stated that, but apparently we can't say that enough. So yeah, I would say that any state of the United States allowing a state-issued license plate to include the battle flag of essentially a treasonous foreign country, kind of problematic. But
just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit. But, we at least won our SCOTUS for the state of Texas the right to say, no, we're just not going to do that. So, yay, Texas. You mentioned redistricting. In Arizona, there was some concern about the gerrymandering that we hear so much about. So they hired an independent commission to try to redraw the maps, and the Arizona legislators got pissed off and tried to go over that because apparently they saw that as only their right to do that, because they wanted to keep the lines to benefit, the party in power. And so the people took it to the commission and the people to get to the law, and the law went all the way to SCOTUS, or I'm sorry, the case went all the way to SCOTUS, and the SCOTUS baby's trying to get in the conversation. Looks like it went all the way to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS decided that it was acceptable for an independent commission to redraw.
Right, so I think that'll help if it can, especially if it can be
applied to other states.
Exactly. That's what I was going for. So
like Texas, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Then maybe we could get our state back. I mean, and I feel like I need to say this. I've never been one to just be beholden to one party. You know, I'm not going to say, oh, I, hate all Republicans and I love all Democrats or, anything like that. I've always been kind of independent, but the past few years, it's hard to be independent when the Republican Party is doing everything it can to just disassociate. And that's the nice word that I'm using. I'm not exactly using the word that I want to use, but, they're doing everything they can to push away people of color, LGBT, anybody that's not, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cisgender male. They're like, forgive my language, but crapping on them. So, it's kind of hard to maintain that independence. But, when I say we can get our state back, and I know that could be loaded language depending on who's using it.
Right.
If the lines are drawn the way they should be drawn and everybody gets a voice, then how can that be a bad thing? Well, it could be a bad thing if the state is full of crazy people. But, for the most part, when Texas wasn't gerrymandered, we were a lot more moderate. We were bluish-purple, and it just, I'm not trying to say we should go back to good old days or anything like that, but it just needs to be drawn fairly. It needs to be drawn fairly, not the way that it's been, because it's ridiculous. And that's why you see all the craziness that's been going on in the legislature and the House, because, the people that are there, they can't really lose their districts, and they might put, it's just crazy. So, yes, if we could do that in Texas and redraw and have an independent commission, I think that would be a good first step towards bringing sanity back.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I've known people that ran for office and for local capacities like school board and whatnot, and there was a lot of complaining about what the gerrymandering has done, and there was a lot of blaming and finger pointing of almost the Democrats, but in a lot of ways, a lot of the blame was put on Dewhurst, ironically, considering these were basically self-proclaimed Tea Partiers that it was speaking to about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was interesting, because it's like, okay, well, that benefits you, and I'm surprised you have a problem with that, because usually that's not the case. Usually there's a lot of gloating. Well, that's why you have blueberries all over the state of Texas and the rest is red. Yeah, but also Austin is a fairly liberal place. It's the state capital, major university there, It's the city of, Hollywood stars live there, for crying out loud. But it's mostly represented by very Republican. So not even just GOP, but Texas GOP, which is a pretty extreme part of the GOP party.
Right.
So, yeah, it's the whole thing is just strange. And it really underrepresents a lot of people, because a good example of that is I'm pretty sure Harris County is one of the many counties that elected and then re-elected President Obama,
mm-hmm.
but then were mixed represented by R&D.
Right.
So, yeah. It's almost like we are two-faced in that regard. But, people are complex, I guess. But that doesn't segue very smoothly into the next thing, but this is a pretty big thing. Marriage equality is now the law of the land, and I'm saying marriage equality as opposed to same-sex marriage just because it's marriage equality exists, so same-sex marriage, while lawful, is treated no differently now, for the most part, than heterosexual marriage. So, yay!
Yay, love wins.
Yeah, exactly. So in the case, the holding was that the 14th Amendment requires the state to license a marriage between two people of the same sex and to recognize a marriage between two people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state. So basically, equal treatment under the eyes of the law, which is what the 14th Amendment is about. For those of you who don't remember your, high school civics, I know it's been a while for some people, it's okay. A lot of these rulings can kind of remind you of how all of that works, so it's okay. It's pretty exciting to see how many people are really well behind this. I will have links to articles. There's a local mom who blogged about this, and then I also have, for these SCOTUS rulings, I have the direct SCOTUS link themselves that you can read for those who really want to get into the legalese of it. Of course, we all expected that there would still be people fighting it because, in their eyes, they weren't saying that this was a settled thing. No, you're violating my religious rights because now I have to treat people who are, not cisgender heterosexual the same as cisgender heterosexual, which apparently is just asking too much of some people. So, we've had resignations in certain parts of the country for people that felt that violated their religious freedom so much that they couldn't perform their job. Or in some cases, I believe there was a judge that said he wasn't going to perform any marriages for anybody because he would be forced to perform for everybody.
So, and the whole registrar's office and our county clerk's office in Tennessee, I forget the name of the municipality, but I
think it was Decatur.
Quit.
Yeah, I think it was Decatur, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. It's just like, okay, well, I guess that's fair, because if you really feel that way, then I'm sure there are plenty of people that need a job that could come in there and would be more than willing to do it. Because people, on the large part, are a lot more fair when it comes to that kind of thing, and it hasn't been very well represented in any kind of polling, because the way we poll is so black and white. They don't actually clarify the nuances of human behavior, and so you don't really get a clear picture on where people stand with that.
Right.
And the same thing can be said for abortion, actually. But that's my little mini tangent. The good news in regards to that, if marriage equality wasn't good enough news, is that Texas has actually started to concede, even though we were initially fighting it. Of course, by we, I mean Austin. Abbott and Paxton were basically telling people to disregard. We will not make people violate their religious liberty, because apparently religion is more important than civil rights to these people. There's an article in the Texas Tribune very recently, like at the beginning of the month, that said, citing the Supreme Court's ruling, a three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit then affirmed a lower court ruling that the state's ban is unconstitutional. Same-sex marriage is the law of the land, and consequently the law of the circuit, and should not be taken lightly by actors within the jurisdiction of this court. So basically they're telling Texas to wrap it up, because this needs to start now. So the attorney for the Texas same-sex couples asked the Fifth Circuit to affirm Garcia's ruling and direct him to wrap up the case. So yeah, they're definitely telling them, all right, come on, you need to finish this.
Right, which they did, and then, you have the Republicans proclaiming that even though they've lost the fight against same-sex marriage, the next battlefront would be in defense of religious liberty. So I anticipate they'll be, now it's good news that they stopped, that they conceded on this front, but I anticipate the next front will be, they're going to start with some of these Arizona-esque religious liberty laws. And, hopefully we'll all fight those, and we'll speak out, and we'll talk to our representatives, and we'll let them know that that is not what we want. But, we're looking at the laws that say, well, it's against my religious freedom to bake, wedding cake for homosexual partners, or it's against my, religious freedom to serve these people at my restaurant. So
that would fall under the civil rights, though.
Definitely. I'm hoping that that they see what happened in Arizona, and they see what happened in, I think, Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken, and they don't go there. But I see somebody's going to try it. Now, how far it gets, I don't know, because I'm hoping that if there's one thing that Texas likes more than anything else, is business and money. So if businesses say, we're not going to come to your state because of this, and the money dries up, I'm pretty sure they'll stop having such a problem with it. You know, it's we can act like Texas is a part of the old South and the, Bible Belt and everything else, but there are so many people here that really all they care about is the bottom line, where they're going to make their next million. So
Right.
you play with their money and, they'll deal with it a lot quicker than you would expect.
Exactly. Another big SCOTUS ruling was that, once again, the Affordable Care Act was under attack. This time it was about the subsidies that they were providing to people participating in the health insurance marketplace so that they could afford to get health insurance. Because a big part of the problem in this country was people couldn't afford to pay health insurance completely on their own if their company that they were working for wasn't already providing it for them. Or perhaps they couldn't afford the one that their companies were kind of sort of providing. Or they weren't working enough hours to get it. So basically, yeah, there are a lot of subsidies available to many families, and a lot of them have been able to sign up. Well, that was under attack, but thankfully SCOTUS was on a roll because they ruled. The holding stated that the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Section 36B's tax credits, are available to individuals who purchase health insurance on an exchange created by the federal government. So the thing that they were saying was regarding state exchange, federal exchange, because there are a lot of states, like Texas, that chose not to do a state exchange. They were just going to have their people use the federal exchange. And so they were saying, well, we shouldn't use state money for federal programs. And SCOTUS said, nope, they can do it. Because not doing it would be harmful and in the opposite direction of what the law was intended to do. We cannot interpret federal statutes to negate their own stated purposes per SCOTUS directly. So, yeah, that's what they said. And Texas legislators even tried putting in a law this past session saying that they would need to put indicators on people's insurance cards of those who went through the market exchange to have a distinction on their cards saying that they got a qualified health plan, or QHP, or QHPS if they got a subsidy, on their cards so that providers would know that that's how they got their insurance. But I don't think it passed.
Right. I would hope not, because I can tell you from experience, I've gone into doctors' offices that have had, and I mean since the ACA was first ratified, that have had big signs on their doors saying, we will not take Obamacare. We will not take, they'll never call it the ACA, which is what the name is. But, it's always kind of in a negative light. Oh, no, we will not take Obamacare. And I would ask them, well, how would you know? It's insurance is insurance is insurance. That's like saying you won't take Cigna because you just don't like Cigna, which is fine. Some doctors do that. But it was always really, strange to me how that moral objection, and the moral objection of doctors to the Affordable Care Act was always very interesting to me. You could tell a lot of them had bought into the propaganda around the program at first.
Yeah.
Because the way I looked at it was, hey, more customers for you, right? More
right,
people
exactly.
are insured, more people are going to go to the doctor. I'm not seeing the problem here. A lot of them were upset about the electronic medical records. They didn't want to switch over to that, which I could understand. That was a huge, huge undertaking and, things like that. But, having that on a patient's card saying, this is the ACA or this is, on a health exchange, I think it would, especially here in places like Texas and certain rural areas and stuff where I've seen these doctors' offices with these big signs, I think that would be more harmful to the patients than good, because it just allows the doctors to refuse them, for no other reason than they don't like the president, or they don't like, the fact that we have something close to a national health plan, which we still don't have a national health plan, truth be told.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing that didn't pass.
Right.
It's just another discriminatory tactic, really.
Exactly. That's just another way to allow doctors a format to discriminate if they so choose, which also encourages that. because it is considered very popular in certain parts of the state to be so anti-Obamacare. I get it if you're one of the people that were left out of the subsidies because you quote-unquote make too much, but think about all the people that can't afford health insurance at all that are left in the dark because of not expanding Medicare.
Right.
Which would have been paid for 3 years until they started downsizing. But Perry thought that wasn't enough, that wasn't good enough, and we don't want your money except for, when hurricanes hit and things like that, and we're not okay, Big state flooding, okay to take federal money then, but for people to get health care, that's not good enough.
Right, and the thing is, I remember when this was all being decided, Governor Perry was saying, well, we can't take this money now because then when it runs out, the state will be left with this larger bill. Okay, 3 years, and then it goes to 90%. It doesn't go to zero, it goes to 90%. So, a lot of people didn't understand that. And so they would parrot these talking points, and they would say, well, the federal government will give us this money for now, but then they'd leave us with this huge bill. And that's not exactly how that would work, at all. So it's interesting all the different ways that people use propaganda to speak against the Affordable Care Act, and how a lot of people who it would have helped, talk about people voting against their own interests, but a lot of people that it would have helped were voting against it, and they're like, well, I don't want Obamacare. Oh, but and actually, again, just popped into my head, there was, not a skit, but like a man on the street kind of report, where people would say, they would talk about the things that the Affordable Care Act did.
Yeah.
And, people would say, well, how do you feel about Obamacare? Oh, I hate Obamacare. Obamacare is horrible. And they'd say, well, what do you feel about the Affordable Care Act? And they'd say, oh, well, that makes sense. That's good. People need help. And it's like the same thing. So it shows you about, propaganda and framing and how you present things to people. You will have people voting against their own interests just because.
Yeah, because there's a party line that appeals to their senses in some way, and a lot of times, it's easier to just believe what you're told and get outraged and then keep going, as opposed to, is this person really telling you the truth of the matter, which is unfortunately not often enough. So, luckily this is, an age of information. We have all kinds of information available to anyone that can access the internet. And you can even access the internet at public libraries for, anyone that's not able to at home. But that's not even, a regular access. So there are still some access issues, which is a whole other, topic entirely. But in what we refer to as the age of information, it should be easier to get this information in an open and honest way, but it's not. And I think a big part of that has to do with, well, the internet isn't necessarily biased in and of itself.
Right, but sometimes you have to do some digging.
Right.
You have to know your sources. Like, for example, I don't subscribe to a lot of the things on Breitbart, and a lot of times I won't even click on that website. And there are some websites that are built, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see that it's a satire site. So, you definitely have to check your sources, but there's some really good sources on the internet, too. And you can also find primary sources, like the SCOTUS decisions that we've been talking about this episode. You can find those direct decisions, and there's even a SCOTUS blog where they kind of make it easier for you to read in layman's terms.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so, the ACA has helped Texas quite a bit. We've reduced our number of uninsured by roughly 2%, according to the sources that I found. Even Rice University did a study on that, and I'll have that posted as well. So since we didn't expand Medicare, we only reduced by 2%. And so we still have the highest rate of uninsured and the highest number, because California did the expansion of Medicare. So they no longer have the highest number, since they're a more populated state than Texas. We now have the record for both. And the ones that are disproportionately affected, as almost like per usual, this is almost the disclaimer for every issue. In Texas, adult Texans that are Hispanic, low income, are a large number of the uninsured, especially the adult uninsured in the state. Part of that are immigrants. Saying otherwise would be to ignore the fact. but that is not all of them. Texas was once Mexico, so let's not pretend that, there's not a valid reason that we have lots of people of Hispanic or Latina origins. So that's the main reason why they do, unfortunately, represent a large part of our uninsured persons, unfortunately.
Right.
So yeah, and I also have a thing on PolitiFact where a lot of the sources I found did a review in early 2014 when ACA was first officially going into effect for everybody, when it was being rolled out completely, as opposed to just in parts. So the data is mostly from April or February of 2014. There will most likely be updated data soon, depending on how often they do it, and we can always keep an eye out for that as well.
Right. We definitely have to keep an eye on it, and hopefully with a lot of these rulings that have come down, the people that have been holding out to see if it would be reversed will finally kind of get the point that it's not,
right,
and move forward in helping people become insured and helping people who've been needing help for years now finally get that help. And I don't understand why they don't realize that people being uninsured hurts all of us. Because if you're sick and you're uninsured, you wait to the last minute, you go to the emergency room. It's usually a county emergency room. All of us pay for that.
Right.
As opposed to just getting people help.
Yeah.
Where you don't necessarily have to, directly pay for it yourself or, with higher taxes and things like that. It's just counterintuitive.
Right. It costs more to go to the hospital for anything, any kind of care. So getting an aspirin from a hospital is like hundreds of dollars versus maybe a copay if you have insurance.
Right. And that's even, like I said, that's even with insurance, it's higher. It costs more to go to the doctor, or go to the hospital. But if you have insurance, you're more likely to make a doctor's appointment and, handle it before it gets to that point than if you don't have insurance. So, yeah, hopefully they'll get it now. We can only hope.
We can only hope and just keep an eye on it and keep calling them out, because it's like, okay, really? It's been demonstrated that preventative care prevents high costs more often, just like preventative family planning prevents abortion more often.
Right.
It's kind of the same concept. It's kind of part of the same book, really, of keeping those things down. But looks like, wow, we really went on. You just could sit and discuss this stuff all day, I think we do need to go ahead and wrap up. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Please look for another episode in 2 weeks, which should be recorded on the 19th and uploaded by the 20th here on the channel, Freethinking Femmes. There will be links to what we discussed in the description if you want to check it out. There are always people in need, so if you can and are able to, please consider giving to local groups like the Houston Area Women's Center, the Food Bank, Red Cross, etc. Any and all.